Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nothing Exempt. It's 2021, and it's time for yet another March Madness episode. As always, I really know nothing about any of the teams coming into March Madness, and Nick knows everything. So, Nick, tell me just one thing. Who wins overall?
Well, I mean it's probably going to be Gonzaga. They're 26-0. They're on pace to have the first unbeaten season since Indiana in 1976. They have four legitimate NBA prospects on their team, and they are good. They're very good offense. They have a good but not great defense, and they really haven't been challenged in any game this season except for when they played West Virginia a few months ago, and they won that game by about five.
Okay, so I expect them to win it all, Nick. I mean, I'm not going to put any money on it because you said so, but that's the full expectation is that you're right. So
Yeah, I
here's
mean,
here's the
was
real question. Here's the real question, Nick. It's what does March Madness mean to you?
Oh man, it's been 2 years since we've had March Madness because last year it got canceled due to the pandemic, and that was when March Madness got canceled. That was kind of the signal to the world that this thing was serious and not just like your typical flu, and and that's what I remember is like, God, they had to cancel March Madness. I remember the stock market. That's when the selling went from like pretty bad to like full on panic too. So it was like, oh, this is real. Like the whole world is really going to shut down because of they're even taking away March Madness. So it's been 2 years since we've had a March Madness, and I really like it. I like basketball generally. I don't really like a lot of the woke politics that has surrounded basketball recently, to be quite honest. But that doesn't really, as long as they keep that relatively mild, it doesn't really kill my interest in the sport as a whole. And basketball
So
is,
Nick, how do you get educated on all the teams that join up in such a short amount of time? Because most of the best players here you will not see again next year, and so it means you generally have a whole new slate of people to learn about. Do you like how in depth do you go?
I don't go in depth as much as you think I do. I mean, I don't really this season. I didn't really start watching until right before the conference tournament started. So if you're not familiar with college basketball, there's four parts to a season. There's non-conference play, which is the first 10 games or so that you play teams outside your league, and that usually includes special non-conference tournaments where teams from quality leagues pace each other in these special single elimination events that usually happen around Thanksgiving. Those were mostly canceled this year due to the pandemic, so we didn't really get that part of the season. And usually, when I college basketball season, since I've been pretty busy with life and stuff, I really only watch around that Thanksgiving time, and then when the month of March starts. Basically from like January 1st to March 1st is the conference league where you play all the teams usually twice each, sometimes less if you're in a bigger conference. You play all the teams in your league, and then that determines like the league standings. And then after you do the regular season for your league, you have conference tournaments where you have a single elimination tournament with all the teams in your individual league. And there's 30 of these conferences in the country, so you have 30 conference team tournaments going on within a 2 week period. And that's when I start watching again, and that's how I kind of get caught up with things. Is I watch the
That's
conference
the
tournaments and see
the
all.
conference tournaments are where it begins to matter, right?
Yeah, because
You could be
even if
O
you
and whatever going into the conference tournament, and you could still win the rest of the way out,
yeah,
right?
if you win the conference tournament, even if you were 0-25 going into it, you will make the national tournament, the NCAA tournament. And we had a few teams like that this year. Georgetown, notably, was eighth place in the Big East and 9-13, and they won 4 games in 4 days to win the Big East tournament in Madison Square Garden, which is kind of regarded as one of the more entertaining tournaments of the conference tournaments. Like the best sporting event in terms of entertainment value I've ever watched in my life. was Syracuse, Connecticut in the Big East quarterfinals in 2009. It went 6 overtimes. The game started at like 6 o'clock and ended like at, I don't know, 11 p.m. Pacific. So it's 3 hours. Imagine all the people on the East Coast up till 2 in the morning watching basketball at MSG. And I just never seen people so like intense about anything in my life.
So,
And
I had no idea college basketball could go to 6 overtimes. At what point do they just start doing free throws?
there's no point of that. That's what makes it great.
Oh, so you can go to 12 overtimes? Like
Go to
it
as
doesn't
many
matter.
overtimes as needed. The records are usually about 6 or 7 in college and professional. NBA, I think it's 4. In college, it's 6 or 7. I'm not really quite sure, but yeah, you can go as many overtimes as you need to finish the game. And the conference tournaments are all single elimination. So if you lose, you're out. And that's from there's 300 teams, and outside of the 68 that make the tournament, your season is done if you lose that conference tournament, which is why there's so much intensity involved with it. Which is why I like college basketball. I'm starting to like it more than the NBA because even though the NBA is much better quality of actual basketball going on because they're much better players, they don't have the same sense of urgency. Like even in the playoffs, it's still best of 7. You have to lose 4 times to get knocked out. Whereas it's not best of 7. If college basketball playoff was a best of 7, the best team would win every time, and it would be very predictable. But the fact that it is single elimination really literally means anybody can win anytime, and your season can end in a snap.
Yeah, it can end like someone gets ejected early in the game or someone gets sick that day. There's a lot of reasons why your best player can take you out of the tournament by just screwing it up or getting sick or something. Testing positive for COVID.
Well, yeah, there were a few teams that pulled out of their conference tournaments because of COVID. Virginia, Kansas, and North Carolina A&T, and Duke. Well, Duke wasn't going to make the tournament anyway. They had to win the ACC tournament, and that's actually what's great about this year. Duke is a bad team, or is not a good one, and a lot of Duke is a very polarizing. They're kind of like the Donald Trump of college basketball. People either love Duke or they hate Duke. It's just because
So
of
so
kind of
as far as the teams you really care about that are in the tournament, but not necessarily the ones you'd put money on, who are the ones you're rooting for?
it's obvious who I'm rooting for. It's UC Santa Barbara.
Okay, understood. Nick graduated from UCSB and so he's happy. What did they
They're
rank, Nick?
actually
I
they
I
won
haven't
their
even.
conference tournament, and they actually won when they were first. They've been a first seed a lot, which is the best team in the regular season, but they always blow it in the conference tournament to either Irvine or to Fullerton or some of these random little schools. And this time they actually won and they blew out Irvine. And now they are a 12 seed, which is basically realistically the lowest seed in the tournament that you have more than like a 20% chance of winning your first round game. They have probably a
So they're
35 to
playing
40%
Creighton.
chance of winning their first round game, which is the
Okay,
best.
so they're playing Creighton. Are they going to beat Creighton, Nick?
I'm picking them to beat Creighton, but I mean, are they? I mean, Creighton has good shooters. Normally, I like to root for Creighton because my grandfather went to medical school at Creighton back in the 50s.
What's what state is that in? I don't
It's
even
in
know.
Omaha, Nebraska.
Ah,
Yeah, that's why my dad was born in Omaha. It's because my grandpa was attending Creighton Medical School at the time. And um, yeah, I tend to have a lot of sympathy for them. They're a Catholic school in Omaha, but they're playing UC Santa Barbara, so down with the Blue Jays.
all right. Are there any upsets that you see in this first round
Well, I mean,
besides you,
what
Santa
makes this
Barbara?
tournament interesting is that I think it's going to be quite a bit more unpredictable than usual. Because, and we'll go after this question, we'll kind of go through our brackets. Because I think, did you make one too?
I did, but I did it in a way that's going to make you angry.
Okay, we'll go through each of them. We'll go through each of the matchups. That's how we're going to do this. But in terms, for instead of pointing out my specific upsets now, but what's different about this tournament is since there's a lot fewer games played, especially out of conference games. So we don't know actually how good these teams are. Like most of the out, usually you kind of have an idea of how good a conference is, and based on how they and the conference reputation is developed by how well they play in the out of league games. And since there are so few out of league games this year, we don't know how good these teams are against competition outside of their own league. So it's going to be a lot less predictable than normal.
That makes
And
sense. If you win 8-0 in your league, but you don't know that the whole league stinks.
yeah, like the example is Colgate. They're 14-1, but they're the 14th seed because they didn't play anybody outside the Patriot League, which is a rather weak league. And so you can say that about UCSB too. They didn't play any good teams outside their league. So they're 22-4, which is thinking, oh, man, this would be great. But they only got a 12 seed because they're 22-4 in a below average league. They didn't play, they didn't really beat anybody in a power league. So we don't know actually how good UCSB is or how bad they
So,
are.
so one more question before we go through the matchups. How do they pick who plays who?
Okay. Well, basically, you have a selection committee that decides all the 68 teams. There's 30 automatic bids, and actually, no, there's only 29 this year because the Ivy League, due to COVID, opted out of playing because they're so progressive, the Ivy League.
That's
So they decided we're not going to play college basketball this season to make a virtue signal. And look who gets no, and no, there's no Ivy League team this year in the NCAA tournament. Stinks for them. But probably all of our Ivy League listeners are going to be hating me now for this. But yeah, they should have
oh,
played.
Nick, they already hate us because we didn't go to the Ivy League.
That is true. But so since there is no Ivy League team, there's one extra at large team. So now instead of the normal 37 at larges, you get 38, I think. And so then the at larges are picked based on a combination of things. There's a rating system called the net, which measures computer analytics, like how well you actually play the game based on how well you score and versus defend on statistical measures and like point margins and other things like that. That's called the net and the Ken Pomeroy scores. Then you have your records, obviously. Who did you beat? Who did you play? Who are the quality of the opponents that you beat? And who are the quality of the opponents you beat? And they sort this in quadrants: quad one, quad two, quad three, quad four. And basically, if you want to make the tournament, you need to win as many quad one games as you can. And especially if you're in a smaller school that doesn't play very many quad one teams, like a Santa Barbara, you cannot lose quad four games. Santa Barbara was an automatic bid. They wouldn't have made it as an at large. But some mid majors did make it as at larges, such as Drake in the Missouri Valley and Utah State in the Mountain West. So that's how it's selected. And what's also great about this tournament is a lot of the traditional powers, such as Duke and Kentucky, were not good enough to make it this year. So you're going to see a lot of new faces.
And this is the opportunity for some players who weren't going to go to the NBA to have a great month and have a shot at being drafted, right?
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, if you play, especially if you're a senior, because the NBA has a heavy bias against upperclassmen in the draft now, which I think is a mistake, honestly, because you'd be surprised what percentage of the All NBA players and All Stars still are upperclassmen, even though basically there's not that many players left from before the one and done era. Um, I think they're very underrated. Yeah, a good run in the tournament will increase your draft stock. Also, it means a lot for a lot of these schools. Like if you're a smaller school, according to Bloomberg, your enrollment will go up 10% if you pull off an upset, which is big money for these schools.
And for all of that, you don't get paid anything to play in the game. So you play poorly, you have no reward. You play very
Okay,
well.
Brian, you were a D1 college swimmer. Do you regret doing it?
If it wasn't for the fact I met my wife on the swim, like my wife was on the swim team with me, if it wasn't for that, I probably would have gone back in time and not swam in college. But hey, I did meet my wife, and yes, I wouldn't change it now because of that.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I was never really good enough at sports to be a Division I athlete, but I think it would be fun even to be a Division I basketball player. Like I get a scholarship at a elite university if I was smart enough to pick the right one. Like if I was a basketball player, I would probably go to Stanford, UCLA, or Duke, even though I don't like them like as like from a fan perspective, because those are top academic degrees that are worth a lot prestige wise and expensive tuition, and I get to go for free and play basketball, and those are in good leagues too. So I could play against the best play competition. It's not like
Right. Well, if you're getting offered money to play in terms of scholarship, it's worth it. Plenty of those players do not have scholarships and just want to make the team and want to go to the NBA or just want to be on a team.
yeah, but I mean the guys who have NBA potential all have scholarships.
Most of them have to, right? But I'm going to assume it's not exactly 100%.
If you're not good enough to have a scholarship, you're not good enough to make a professional league, whether here or in Europe.
Doesn't mean there aren't people trying.
Well, of course, they're all trying.
Yeah. Hey, you can have an NBA dream and not make it. So I gotta believe there's a number one player on a team that can't afford any scholarships.
But there's going to be some reform on this whole pay for the whole players being paid. They're probably not going to be paid directly by the universities, but if you are a really good player and you want to just go to the NBA and not worry about school, the NBA itself will pay you $150,000 a year or more to just play in their minor league for 1 year, and then you get drafted and just get in a regular NBA contract. There's 5 top prospects did that last year. They skipped college entirely. That really hurt UCLA because I think one of them was playing there, and it hurt a few other schools like Memphis too. And then you have and then also on top of that, they're changing a lot. There's process to change the rules in the NCAA that you can make money on your likeness and your image, and like if people want to promote you as a player specifically, like your jersey with your number on it and stuff like that, you can start you're now legally there's legislation that will make it legally required for you to get your cut. So there's making progress on that.
That's awesome. So you want to go through our bracket?
Yeah, let's start with we kind of already talked about this a little bit with the Gonzaga and UCSB. Let's start with the West region. So our first game is Gonzaga versus the winner of Norfolk State and Appalachian State. Brian, do you have any commentary
Nick,
on this?
Do we really need to cover any of the 1 versus 16s? Are there any of them that you think are going to flip for the 16?
No, we've only had one, and that was UMBC 3 years ago. And if the 16 seed wins, we'll do like we did for UMBC. We'll make a whole show dedicated to you.
Yeah. And so I think we can skip the commentary. Gonzaga wins and plays Oklahoma or Missouri.
Yeah. I would say, I mean, I haven't watched much of either of these teams, but I'm picking Missouri here. They have better wins out of the league. They beat Illinois, who's a 1 seed. And, yeah, I mean, and also Oklahoma seemed to fade down the stretch later in the season. And I think Missouri, neither of them really have any NBA prospects. That's the other way I look at these picks is I look at NBADraft.net and I try to find who's going to be the expected players picked, not in this year's draft only, but next year's as well. And based on the level of NBA talent on a team, I use that as like my tiebreaker. None of these guys have any none of these teams seem to have any really top tier NBA prospects either. So I'm just going to go with Missouri on this one, just based on its out of league. What about you?
Nick, I think we can skip my commentary on all of it. I'll just say how I did it. I picked the lower number all the way across the board until I had 1 versus 1s, and then I picked Gonzaga over Michigan and Baylor over Illinois, and then I picked Baylor to win it all. And I had no methodology.
You're just doing straight chalk then.
Yeah, and so I hope I beat you, Nick, because you put a lot of time and effort into this.
But yeah, I mean, if it depends. Like if you have a pool of people in the competition who's small, that's probably an optimal strategy. That worked in 2008. That was the only year you had all 4 1 seeds win. Was to the Final Four. It was 2008. That was, I think, like Kansas, North Carolina, Memphis, and UCLA. I remember watching that national final when I was in college, and yeah, Memphis choked at like a 9 point lead, um, and then went into overtime, and Kansas won. But that's really not about this conversation here. So yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
so we can.
so I'll just go through my picks then. Then for the rest of it, for Creighton versus UCSB, I mean, Creighton's the better team most likely, but I'm just picking UCSB for sentimental reasons here. So I have Santa Barbara winning that game. Virginia, Ohio is interesting. Virginia is technically the defending national champions because they won the 2019 tournament, but they don't have any of those same players because they all went to the NBA. Uh, and the thing is, Virginia is one of the schools that had to opt out of their conference tournament due to COVID issues, and they can't come to the Indianapolis where the tournament's being played until the day before because of it. And so they may be a little not really jet lagged because there's no time zone difference, but they're flying in before a game and don't get to practice. So they're better than Ohio, but they're going to be a little bit discombobulated. But I still think Virginia's going to pull it off, so I picked them to win that game. USC versus Wichita and Drake. Well, I mean, Wichita State is a nice little comeback story, especially after their coach got kicked off the team for being charged for abusing his players. And their assistant kind of came back and turned around the team. So, and then Drake was a really good team all year. They lost a lot of their best players to injury, though, so they may not have much left in the tank for the tournament because of that. So, I mean, they're both scrappy teams, but none of them really. USC has the Evan Mobley, who's going to be the second best player drafted in the NBA as of today, and they have a lot of talent generally. And I think West Coast basketball is somewhat underrated as a whole. And so I'm going to pick USC to win whoever wins that other playing game. Um, I don't think either of those teams can stop Evan Mobley. And then Kansas versus Eastern Washington. I have Kansas. I know nothing about Eastern Washington. Um, Kansas isn't as good as they usually are, but they still have enough talent to crush Eastern Washington. Oregon versus VCU. I'm picking Oregon. Oregon's underrated as well. It's just a systemic bias against West Coast basketball generally. And VCU hasn't really have any good wins outside the Atlantic 10. Oregon.
Why is there systemic bias against West Coast basketball?
A few reasons. One, there's no West Coast team has won a national championship since 1997. So, and there was a big drought of West Coast teams making the Final Four between 2008 and 2017. The Pac-12 has been down lately due to bad TV deals, and because of that bad recruiting exposure, like you can't get the Pac-12 network on YouTube.tv. So even if I wanted to watch Pac-12 games, I can't unless if I get local cable. And if you don't live in the West Coast, you can't watch them at all. So people don't really watch Pac-12 basketball in general. And people say, oh, the West Coast, they just don't care as much about sports as the South or the Midwest, which is true. So those schools are willing to try harder, for a lack of a better term, to win and care more. Their fan bases care more too than the West Coast. Whereas West Coast people are just like, well, if we're good, great. We'll wear your shirt. If not, it's like whatever, man. That's my opinion on why that's the case. And also, it might have to do with demographics, particularly football and basketball. I mean, the people who are playing football, especially, I think the bias against the West Coast is legitimate for football. West Coast football is just not as good anymore because the people who are moving to the West Coast are educated professional types who don't want their kids playing football due to concussions. And so, therefore, their talent of California football is dropping. Like the number of people playing football is down over 20%, I think, in the last 3 years, and this was pre-COVID. The talent isn't there anymore. Basketball is not the same. I don't see why there should be an institutional bias against West Coast basketball anymore. Well, but it's just people don't watch it because of the time zone difference. All the games also start late too. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Does that mean that there's like an extreme bias against Hawaii?
Oh yeah, but Hawaii's not any good. It doesn't matter.
Well, maybe West Coast basketball is not any good. Like, why
well,
can't Hawaii recruit the best players with the fact that they get to live in Hawaii?
well, Hawaii they spend most of their budget on transportation. That's one of their problems. They left the Mountain West, which is a good league, to join the Big West, which is UC Santa Barbara's league, and all the small or lower budget, because they're not necessarily small schools, the lower budget West Coast states, California state schools are all in one league with Hawaii, because Hawaii only wants to travel to one place. They don't want to spend the money flying to like Oregon or Utah or Wyoming or Colorado or the other places that they would have to if they were in a
Okay,
bigger league.
if you're listening to this, LeBron James Jr., the next one to be, go spend your 1 year in college in Hawaii.
I don't even know
Start
if
a
LeBron James
tradition.
Jr. is going to go to college.
Yeah. Yeah, you get 150 grand and play in the minor leagues. Okay, if you're like the best college player that is going to go to college, go spend that 1 year in Hawaii. Just to start a
Why?
tradition. Starting a tradition of what Hawaii being the domineering best college out there because you get to go surfing every other day and it's nice.
I mean, they should be if they put if they put the money into that program like the big schools do. Um, they could be good. It's just that they put all their money into travel and they just don't they're not willing to spend the big bucks on the coaches or the facilities to compete. I mean, I would like to see Hawaii good, and I think nobody picked Hawaii to beat Cal in there for when the 1 year they did make the tournament because yeah, you're probably right. Nobody watched their games, and I picked Cal to beat them, and Hawaii blew them out. One, all right, I like you. This is what we like having a non-college basketball fan on. He brings up the existential questions of the sport, like why isn't Hawaii any good?
Okay, Nick, let's continue down the list.
All right, so should we do the second round of the West or just do the first round for all the regions?
Let's just do the first round of all the regions, Nick.
All right.
So the East, Michigan is going to beat St. Mary's.
Mount St. Mary's.
Mount St. Mary's.
Or Texas Southern. Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of the 15s or the 16s have a chance. So we kind of skip those ones. Except for we'll talk a little about Alabama Iona because Rick Pitino, who's one of the all-time, I guess, great coaches with a big asterisk on his name. He's been involved in a lot of scandals in his career too. Made his comeback after being disgracefully thrown out of Louisville at Iona. And he's like the only guy in this league. They changed the rules in college basketball that coaches don't have to wear suits anymore. But Rick Pitino still wears a suit because he's Slick Rick. And he's going to be playing Alabama, who's a great team, their best team in the SEC. I don't think he's going to win. But if any of the 15s are going to win, I think this is the one that there's an upset because Rick Pitino is a good coach. And he still has his X's and O's, even with all the grime around it. But I'm not picking them to win. Then okay. You've got, so let's look at the rest of this. LSU St. Bonaventure. The statistics and the numbers would tell you that St. Bonaventure is better, but I'm picking LSU just because they're in a better league. St. Bonaventure didn't really play anybody. And LSU has size, and they looked good in the SEC championship game against Alabama. So I'll take LSU. Colorado versus Georgetown. As I told you, Georgetown is kind of the miracle team in the Big East tournament. Colorado has a good team. Their best free throw shooting team in the country, apparently. But then they happened to miss all the important ones when they played against Oregon State in the Pac-12 tournament. So what figures? Um, Colorado, I mean, they have some good guards, but their center is also skilled, but he's kind of like out of shape for a college basketball player. Um, I think they still win this game just because they have a lot more talent than Georgetown, but I wouldn't be surprised if Georgetown won this either. But I'm picking Colorado in a close one. Uh, Florida State versus UNC Greensboro. Greensboro's got a Russ Miller, who's a rising coach in the sport. Florida State has Leonard Hamilton as their coach, who's like, you should look him up on Google. He's the guy who never ages. Like he's like he's like in his 70s, and he looks like he's like 40.
Well, good for him.
So that's what he's known for one. And two, he is a pretty good coach. I mean, he's turned Florida State from being one of the worst programs in the ACC to the best. And um, and Florida State also stands out. They're just always bigger and taller and longer than whoever they play. He goes out of his way to recruit just like size. And so Florida State is just going to have a huge size and quickness advantage over UNC Greensboro. So I'm picking Florida State. BYU versus Michigan State / UCLA. Michigan State is a team that probably got in more because of their long-term reputation than their actual season this year. They do have the talent to go far, but they haven't played that well this year. Similar to UCLA. UCLA was off to a good start. They kind of stumbled at the end. I tend to root for UCLA when UCSB is not in the tournament because they're the UC school that actually has a chance to win. And my brother was the captain of the rowing team. So, yeah, I have some sympathies for the Bruins. I don't really know who's going to – I think that game, the Michigan State-UCLA game, is kind of a toss-up. But I think the winner either way beats BYU. I mean, BYU is a good team. They gave Gonzaga a challenge in the WCC title game. They were the only team to be leading against Gonzaga at halftime in any game. But, I mean, they're not the most athletic team. And I think that this is a bad matchup for these guys. BYU has a history of, like, not doing well in the tournament either. Unless if they have, like, a transcendent score. Like, the only two times BYU has made a real run is when they had Jimmer Fredette, who was the leading scorer in the nation, and Danny Ainge, who was also, like, an NBA caliber shooter. They don't have that guy this year, so I think BYU will underperform as usual, and I'll take the Michigan State UCLA winner. Texas versus Abilene Christian. I don't know anything about Abilene Christian, to be honest with you. Texas has been struggling under Shaka Smart the last 5 years, but he's finally managed to turn around. They always have good NBA talent, particularly and the big men. I don't really see Abilene Christian having an answer to Texas' size and speed. And Texas looked good in the Big 12 tournament. In fact, they won it. They beat red hot Oklahoma State to do it as well. So I'm going with Texas. And then UConn and Maryland. I'm going with Connecticut. They have Ryan Boatnight, who's kind of not like a poor man's version of Kemba Walker or Shabazz Napier, or the guard who could take over a game and just score a lot of points and basically control the momentum by himself. Like that's what they did in 2011, 2014. Connecticut, I mean, had decent talent, but they weren't spectacular outs. But they had this one transcendent guard who is a good defender, but more importantly, can just carry a team by just going on a scoring outburst and do that 6 times in a row. That's all you need to win a tournament. I'm not saying Connecticut's going to win this tournament, but they're good enough to beat Maryland, especially as a favored team here. So I'm going with UConn. And I already talked about Alabama, Iona. So let's move on to the South then. Baylor's going. I like North Carolina over Wisconsin. Wisconsin is one of these teams that they're kind of like BYU, except they aren't underachievers. They're slow. They're very white demographically. They're not very athletic. But they're very disciplined. and they have this really the differences between under Bo Ryan and their new coach Greg Gard is one, Bo Ryan was a better recruiter, and two, I think a lot of the players historically have had access to grind with their coach now, whereas Bo Ryan is a lot more likable. uh, I mean, that's what I hear from Wisconsin fans. I can't really confirm that. uh, but I think Wisconsin is somewhat overrated because the Big Ten is generally overrated this year. The Big Ten is a great league, but Wisconsin only went 10-10 in that league, 11-11 if you count the tournament. Uh, North Carolina is very tall. They're the leading offensive rebounding team in the country, or one of them. And their guards are a little inconsistent, which is why they didn't have as good of a season as they were expected to. They were preseason, I think, top 10, and didn't really live up to that because they're an eighth seed. But they're still talented, but they're very young. They're mostly freshmen and sophomores, and but they're good. They have, in terms of raw talent, they're some of the best in the country. But I think they're good enough to beat Wisconsin. So I think the defense is great, and if Wisconsin will make them miss a lot of shots, but if North Carolina gets a lot of offensive rebounds, then they can just make up for it. They can shoot only 30% when Wisconsin shoots 40, but if they're taking twice as many shots, they're going to win the game. So yeah, that's why I'm going with North Carolina. Villanova, Winthrop. Winthrop is another one of these schools from a small league. They went I think 23-1 or something. I don't know their exact record. Let me check.
It's 23-1.
23-1, yeah. And they but they didn't play anybody of note out of league, and so that's why they have such a low seed. But they're good. It's hard to go 23-1 in Division One college basketball, no matter who you are. Villanova is a good team historically, but they lost their best player, their starting point guard, Colin Gillespie, to a season-ending knee injury. So they're not the same as they were throughout the season. So I'm going with Winthrop here to pull the upset. Purdue, North Texas. I know North Texas was managed to beat a choking Western Kentucky team in the Conference USA final. I watched that game on Saturday night. That's the only time I've actually watched North Texas all season. That's like most of these teams, honestly. I watched most of these games prior to the conference tournament, so I'm not really considering myself a professional college basketball analyst. But I mean,
well, I gotta say that I'm a little bummed that my alma mater, New Mexico State, doesn't get to lose their first game of the tournament.
well, you guys lost to Grand Canyon. That's what happens when you lose to a publicly traded school.
One of my favorite traditions is not watching any games all year than watching my team lose the first game of the tournament. So I don't get to do that.
They usually make it a game, though. That's the thing. It's not like they get blown out. They always make it. They always made it a game, New Mexico State.
Yeah, I don't remember if it was a year or two ago, but I guess at least 2 years ago, I remember them losing in overtime.
That was, I think, Auburn. In 2018, they lost by a point or something.
It was enjoyable.
2019 even. Yeah. Or 2018. It was 2019. Yeah, because Auburn made the Final Four that year. So, neither of those teams are in the tournament this year, though. But yeah, North Texas, Purdue. I'm going with Purdue. Purdue they're a team that generally wins the games they're supposed to win, and then whenever they run into a better team in the tournament, that's when they get knocked out. They did get upset one year by Little Rock because Little Rock was coached by Chris Beard, who's one of the best coaches in college basketball. But I don't think North Texas is in the same situation. So I'm going with Purdue here. Texas Tech, Utah State.
Do you think coaches make a bigger difference in college versus the NBA?
Oh, way bigger difference. NBA is mainly about talent. And you could get that talent through signing free agents, draft, trades. Like general managers matter almost as much, if not more, than coaches in the NBA. Whereas in college, the coach is the one doing the recruiting. The coach builds the team and picks players that fits their system. Whereas the coach just does what the front office tells him to do in the NBA. So the coaches not only recruit the players, they design the system around their players, and they develop the players because they're all young. So they're teaching them the skills to get better and to improve in the areas that would benefit them winning more. So I would definitely say college coaches matter a lot more than NBA coaches. That's why college coaches almost get paid as much as NBA coaches, despite there being a lot lower revenue of a league.
Now, would say like Phil Jackson, if he went back to college basketball, would he be as good as he was in the NBA?
No, because a lot of NBA guys just don't want to recruit. Like Brad Stevens, who was the best coach in college basketball when he was in college, he left to go to the Boston Celtics. And one of the reasons why he left is he just didn't like recruiting. And he could just focus solely on basketball, like this X's and O's and like playing, and because he didn't have to worry about developing the roster or building the roster. He could just kind of create the schemes and figure out how to win with the players he's given. And he's done a great job with the Boston Celtics, especially given like how they overachieved in a lot of the years they were supposed to be rebuilding. So yeah, I mean, it's different game. Like a lot of NBA guys, coaches would do well, but there's a lot of NBA coaches like Avery Johnson in Alabama did poorly in college or just mediocre. Like there's a team that barely made the tournament. They weren't like anything special. Whereas he made the NBA finals as an NBA coach. There's a lot of ex NBA coaches that go to college and just don't perform, and vice versa. A lot of great college coaches, like Rick Pitino, for example, he went to the Knicks and the Celtics, and he didn't do very well there because his edge was not in his strategy. His edge was in recruiting better players than his competition. You can't do that in the NBA. So that answers your question.
Okay, sorry for distracting you. Continue on.
All right, so Texas Tech, Utah State. Utah State's good. They have a big man who's probably going to make the NBA, and Neemias Queta. He's like a head taller than everybody else in the Mountain West tournament. I remembered that, and he is a good shot blocker. Texas Tech is coached by Chris Beard, who's one of the better coaches in college basketball. They have a Mac McClung, who was originally famous for being the white guy who could dunk, but he's developed into being a really good shooter too. And they have and they've been a top 25 team all year round consistently. And I would pick Utah State if they were playing maybe as the 10th seed against Florida, but Texas Tech is just too good. And they're too well coached and disciplined to lose to Utah State. So I'm going with Texas Tech here. And then Alabama Colgate. Not Alabama, Arkansas Colgate. This is my upset special, actually. I'm gonna pick Colgate, even though they haven't played anybody. They're 14-1, and Arkansas hasn't been in the tournament really for a couple of years. They're new. They have some good talent. I think this is not really a logical pick really for me. Anyway, I was gonna pick them to lose to Texas Tech anyway, so it wouldn't hurt me too much if I picked them to lose. And I want to have one big upset in the bracket. This is the one I'm gonna do. Colgate is good shooting, 3-point shooting. They've statistically good defense against 3-point shooting. But I mean, Arkansas can run them out the building. But Colgate's a fast team, so they may be able to keep up with them. So I'm going with Colgate here. That's going to be one of my upsets. Florida versus Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech's also been a team consistently like around the top 25. They were 3 seed in the ACC tournament. They're way too low as a 10 seed here. Florida, they're all right SEC team. Like they didn't really have any big wins out of the league for all that I can remember. I mean, they're notable results. Yeah, they lost. Never mind. They beat West Virginia by 5 points. That's their big win out of the league. But I mean, they're 14-9. They've hung around the SEC. They don't really have any like statistical profile or any NBA talent that wows me. I'm going with Virginia Tech here. And then Ohio State against Oral Roberts. Yeah, it's Ohio State. The last one, the Midwest, Illinois versus Drexel. I have a few old coworkers who are alumni of Drexel, so I mean they'd be happy if they could pull this off, but yeah, it's not happening. Illinois is winning. Loyola Chicago versus Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech won the ACC tournament with a very scrappy team, a lot of underlooked players, and they managed to do well as part of it. Loyola Chicago, they made the Final Four 3 years ago, or 4 years ago maybe, and their freshman center, who was really good back then, is now a senior. And they are the 19th best team based on statistical profile, and they're kind of underrated being in the obscure Missouri Valley Conference. So I'm going with Loyola Chicago here over Georgia Tech. Tennessee versus Oregon State. Oregon State is kind of like Georgetown. They had to win all. They were the fifth seed in the Pac-12. No, they weren't the fifth. Yeah, they were the fifth seed in the Pac-12 tournament. They had to win all their games to make it. They're not that great of a team. Tennessee has been consistently a good team this year. I'm going with Tennessee. Um, Oklahoma State, Liberty. Oklahoma State has Cade Cunningham, who's the number one pick in the NBA draft. Uh, they also have a lot of other talented NBA caliber players on that team. They have a good coach. Liberty, they had the tournament last time. They have experience playing against good physical teams, but Oklahoma State, I don't think if you have like the best player in terms of raw talent, you're not going to lose to a team like Liberty. Um, that's Liberty can pull the upset, but I'm going with Oklahoma State. They also been red hot. They've beat like 7 ranked teams in the last 19 days or something like that. So yeah, I'm going with them. San Diego State versus Syracuse. Syracuse is always one of these teams that's kind of on the bubble. Their best player is their coach's son, Buddy Boeheim, who's been on a hot shooting streak the last 2 weeks. But they don't really have that any notable wins out of league. Syracuse, they have history of making deep runs as low seeds, so a lot of people are picking them. They only went 9-7 in their conference, 1-3 against the top 25. Yeah, their best win probably all year is beating North Carolina, which isn't saying much, and they had a close loss to Virginia. Whereas San Diego State is consistently an underrated program. They only had 4 losses all year. They beat good teams out of the league, including UCLA. They dominated the Mountain West, which is a top 10 league, and they have athletic NBA caliber players. They also have one of the best defenses, top 10 in the country. Their coach is experienced, and I think they're going to win. I don't even think it's going to be that close, honestly. I'm picking San Diego State here. They're one of the most underrated programs. Again, West Coast, anti-West Coast bias, once again, is what I think of the betting line showing here. West Virginia, Morehead State. Morehead has been winning a lot of their games recently. They've been on a hot streak, but West Virginia is not going to lose to them. West Virginia has the really good full court press defense. They've learned how to score, which has been a problem of theirs for previous versions of their teams. And Bob Huggins is a good coach. They're not going to lose to Morehead. Clemson, Rutgers. I'm going with Rutgers here. Neither of these teams have a good history of winning in the NCAA tournament, but in the regular season and the conference tournaments, Clemson has not won a single game away from home all year, I think. So, and this game is going to be in Indianapolis. So that's kind of a problem for them. Or maybe they have won one game away from home, but they have a really bad road/neutral court record. I know that. And so I'm going with Rutgers because, it's not in South Carolina. Then Houston and Cleveland State. I'm going with Houston here. The funny thing about Houston is they have a guy named Dejan Giroux, and I have a cousin whose first name is Giroux, which I thought was a very unique name. So, you got to go with Giroux here.
Okay, so Nick, we've covered the bracket. The one question I wanted to make sure I asked before I forgot was, what's the right way to watch the first round? How do you watch it on TV mechanically? Like, what's the best way to do it?
I mean, I have YouTube.tv, which I only buy for the month of March for this very purpose. And you can just flip between the 4 channels, which are True TV, TBS, TNT, and what's the other one? CBS.
Okay, so do you watch like the 16-1 games, or do you just watch?
I watch the games until they get out of hand. Like if it's a 16 seed versus a 1, as soon as the 1 gets a 10-point lead, I stop watching.
So you don't just focus on like the most competitive game and watch it from beginning to end?
No, I mean, I will, whatever game's on first, I'll start watching that. and I'll watch that until as long as it stays competitive. And my threshold for competitive is different based on the seedings. Like if it's a underdog with a super big lead, then I may still watch that because there's a high probability that the better team is going to at least make it interesting. Whereas if it's like a one seed with a 20-point lead over a 16, there's no reason to watch that at all.
So, say it's a really good game, it goes to commercial. Do you swap over to the other game and then come
Yeah,
back?
yeah.
So
And, and
you turn it into red zone.
pretty much, except unless if it's a game like in the last 5 minutes or overtime and it's really close, or maybe if it's the Gauchos, especially in that situation, then I won't be flipping around as much. But yeah, I don't want to watch commercials, particularly with how bad and politicized our commercials have become. I don't really want to watch them.
As much fun as it is to be told why you're a bad person while watching basketball, you'd prefer to just watch basketball.
Yeah, are we going to do the other rounds, or are we just going to stick with the first round?
Oh, let's skip the other rounds because most of this show will turn out to be incorrect after the first round, and we just want to know who's the final four.
Okay, my final four. Let's start with the Elite Eight, I guess. The only real major upsets I have going to later rounds is I have Loyola Chicago beating Illinois, um, which for may probably not, which is kind of a big underdog, but they have the horses to do it. I have San Diego State being West Virginia, but really apart from that, I have most and Oregon and USC advancing to the Sweet 16 and UCSB beating Virginia. But that one I think is probably low to happen, but I can't pick against the Gauchos if it's reasonably close chance. So my Elite Eight is Gonzaga, USC, and the West. I think Gonzaga will beat USC to get to the Final Four. In the East, it's Florida State versus Texas, and I think that's a toss-up. Honestly, I can see either one of these teams winning, but I'll just go with Texas as the tiebreaker because they're the higher seed. Um, and then the Elite Eight in the Midwest will be Houston versus Oklahoma State. I'm picking Houston because I mean Oklahoma State does have the number one pick, but the problem is that Oklahoma State's team is fairly inexperienced in the tournament, and usually like these freshman dominated teams kind of hit a wall somewhere around. There are some exceptions like 2012 Kentucky, 2013 like Kentucky as well, and then not 2013. That 2013 made the NIT. I mean 2015 Kentucky, 2015 Duke, but I mean usually these freshman teams kind of hit the wall around the Elite Eight. So I'm going to pick Houston to go represent that region. And then you've got Baylor versus Ohio State, and I'm picking Ohio State. I don't see three Big 12 teams making the Final Four. I mean, Baylor's a good team, but they did kind of stumble off. And the Big Ten has been a good league, and I expect one of their teams to make it. And the one who I think has the best draw relatively is either Illinois or Ohio State. And I'm just going to go with Ohio State here. So my Final Four then is essentially it's Gonzaga, Ohio State, Texas, and Houston. And I didn't have three Texas teams either because that was very low likely to happen. And then I think it's going to be Gonzaga beating Houston, which is probably actually not going to happen because there are two teams outside of the Power Five in the national championship game. And I don't think that's happened in over 50 years. So my bracket's probably wrong just because of that. Like, it's kind of funny. You make all these picks on an individual level that makes sense, but then when you get to your Final Four, like, do you really see like that as your Final Four? And it's like, no. But I still think Gonzaga's going to win. They're the best team. They have the most NBA talent. They have Jalen Suggs, who could take over a game when they need to, but they also have seniors experience as well. They're my pick to win. Houston's
Nick,
a solid team too, who's underrated because of their conference.
What's the risk of COVID really screwing up the tournament?
Well, the deadline last night passed there was 4 replacement teams that were on deck, like if anybody had to pull out due to COVID, and they had to. But the problem is they needed to file like they were going to pull out by last night, and no team filed.
Yeah, but
So
what about like the morning of or the last test before the
that'll be
quarterfinals
what
or
happened in the
final?
conference tournaments because the NCAA doesn't organize this that well. You basically will have that team will forfeit.
Yeah, so then does that delegitimize the victory if they say the best team got pulled out for COVID?
Yeah, it does. If Gonzaga got pulled out, or Illinois, or Michigan, or any of the 1 or 2 seeds get pulled out, it would delegitimize the tournament, in my opinion.
And with all the money that people have on this tournament, what would be the results of that happening? Nothing,
Well, that's
just a
also why
banger.
I picked UCSB to beat Virginia in my bracket because there's a good chance that they lose to Ohio because of the COVID problems, and or they pull out entirely. There's a chance of that. I doubt it. They make the rules are lenient enough that I don't think any team's going to pull out due to COVID. Like you have to have 5 players that have 7 negative tests in a row. That's the rule. And they're basically not allowing the players to be near each other pre the games. They're all in their own hotel rooms by themselves. They're being a lot. There's all these schools are taking extreme precautions here to prevent them from having to get pulled out due to COVID. And the whole tournament this year is in
Okay, well,
Indianapolis. They're not moving it to other cities like they usually do.
okay, so wrapping up the hour, what else did we need to put in here before we put the bow on it?
I mean, I'm glad college basketball is back. Um, Go Gauchos. That's that's kind of. I mean, I think it's going to be again a more exciting tournament than usual because people don't know who's actually good. Gonzaga is one of the few teams to beat a lot of good teams out of the league, which is why I'm pretty confident that they're the best team. But but I still think with the rest of the tournament's kind of just a big mess, and it's gonna be. I think it's gonna be more unpredictable than usual, and I think COVID will not be as big of a problem as many fear. I think everybody will manage to be able to play. I don't know, Brian. Do you have any thoughts on the NCAA tournament generally, or anything else you want to say?
You know what? I'm looking forward to a couple of things. I'm looking forward to watching some highlights and maybe the ends of some games, or at least being able to put this on. Uh, and I'm also looking forward to see how wrong we are, and maybe my bracket does better than yours, Nick, even though I spent nothing in terms of brain power on making it. So I really hope that's the case. And then I'm also looking forward to all the comments that come in on this video to say, you don't know what you're talking about, you're wrong, blah, 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 blah,
Or
blah.
Nick's a West Coast homer, or what?
Yeah, I want you to know that we will not read that comment and that it was a waste of your time. But with that said, I appreciate you guys listening. If you're still here an hour into the show, do let us know if this was worth your time and what we could do better or what you would like to see next. And with that, we're going to call it a day. Talk to you later.